missed in the course of a transaction when you have an agent coming in and they're getting that exclusive and they're so excited to list the property that oftentimes there are steps that somebody misses between there. And that's the part of it that I really want people to pay attention to. So in other words, you're going out there, you're getting a listing, and now what do? Find out what any issues that could exist for this property. Now, what are we talking about? We're talking about the building itself, and we're talking about the individual unit, if it's a co-op or condo that our client's buying. Context of a single family, different set of issues, right? So right now, let's just focusing on buildings, the due diligence. So we want to make sure on the listing side that we're properly and accurately representing the asset for the seller. What does that mean? Well, we need to know what the maintenance or common charges are and what the taxes are. We need to know anything that's going to be relevant that the buyer of the property is going to contend with. Maybe that runs into, we know that there's a 3-year assessment coming up, and there's going to be a monthly charge, and maybe it's not starting until 6 months out. Well, if it's not starting until 6 months out, it wouldn't be in the listing, but we know about it. And that one's a little bit, maybe you just want to, I wouldn't say anything out of the gate, but you want to make sure that the attorneys are aware of it. You want to make sure that it's not something that's just going to come up because they're reading the board minutes, particularly if it's a very high number. It's a balancing act. You guys know better than I do. If it's a very large sum, obviously you should put it out there. If it's something that the seller of the property is not willing to absorb in the context of their sale, then you're definitely going to want to address it in the listing. A great example. There is a transfer fee upon the sale, and that transfer fee is going to be split between the buyer and the seller. Well, if that's the case, that means that, like, let's just say it's a 2%, they're each going to pay 1%, and it's a $3 million deal. If this seller does not properly list, they shouldn't expect to get that 1%. You can't know in advance that both parties have to pay, not put it in the listing, accept an offer, and then expect that somebody's going to just be okay paying an extra 30 grand. They're not going to be okay with that. So we want to be very careful about that. Now, did I say that right? Let's just make sure. I think I said that right. I just want to, yes, 30,000. Just wanted to make sure that my math, I didn't miss the zeros there. So yeah, that would be an extra 30 grand. So if you make an offer on if someone makes an offer on an apartment and you have the listing and you knew that it was going to be 30,000 each as far as a transfer fee, or call it a flip tax, whatever the building is calling it, and you don't list it, don't expect the buyer to pay it if they've already made an offer that's been accepted. That's the first crucial thing. Another crucial thing that a listing agent should do is the listing agent should make sure that you have the most updated information from the managing agent. Some buildings, certainly the paperwork can be found on Board Packager, and that certainly makes it easier. But there are many times that even Board Packager might not be up to the minute. I always like the agents to make sure that you're getting a current purchase application, so your client can start going through it. Make sure that they understand what's next, what's to come, what am I going to need to provide to the board when I submit the board application, and whether it's a co-op or condo. Now, depending upon your client will dictate the processes, what you're supposed to be participating in. For example, let's just say you're representing a client that intends to do work on whatever property they're buying. And even though they don't know exactly what the work's going to be, that you just know them and they know themselves, and they're going to want to custom outfit the place that they're going to buy. Well, how would you know that? Obviously through conversations with your client, but one of the recommendations that I make to agents that I work with is you want to make sure that you know your customer. So what I recommend doing is have an intake sheet. And on that intake sheet, get as much information about your client as you can. So what will that look like? Well, when does your client have to move? How much can they afford to spend? Are they going to be getting a mortgage? What type of structure will they purchase under? If you have a client that is only going to be purchasing in the name of a trust, it doesn't make sense doing a deal that you don't absolutely know that the building will allow the purchase in a trust. So that would be a great question to have there. As a lawyer, I need to cover the legal aspects. So when I'm doing my intake sheet on my clients, I want to make sure that I have a different set of questions that I ask. And so for me, I'm a lawyer. I want to make sure if my client is purchasing that they're aware of the different manners in which you can purchase property for estate planning purposes. And what do I mean by that? Well, maybe tenants in common, joint tenants with right of survivorship, etc. That's the legal side. So I'm put away the legal aspect of it. We just want to focus on your role, you the broker. And your role is to find your client a property that will best fit what they've expressed to you that their needs are. So they tell you that they need a 2-bedroom, you should be looking for 2 bedrooms. If they tell you that they're in a certain price point, you want to stay within that price point. Now, that doesn't mean that you should be so rigid, right? Because maybe your client's telling you that they need a 2-bedroom, but they also told you that they have no problem doing work. And maybe you found an apartment that's really listed as a loft or a studio, but it's so large that it can be broken up in a manner that you think your client would be interested in. Well, then certainly provide that, ask them if they'd be interested in seeing something else. But your goal is to make sure that you're providing your client with as much information that's relevant for them so that they understand what it is that they're doing from your role. In other words, you meet the client for the first time. What do? Well, you have to give them the disclosure notices. You'll need to give them the property disclosure. You'll have to give them the agency disclosure. You'll get all of that paperwork out of the way. On the listing side, you're going to make sure that you know whether or not your client wants to consent to dual representation. Now, on the listing side, we know things have changed a bit. So while it's your role to ensure that you have terms of how you're going to get paid and how your firm is going to get paid by the listing agent, it's not, you could ask your seller in your form. They will then also say how it is that they want to pay the buyer's agent. Now, some people go about it differently than others. You know, I personally, if my clients come to me, I like to see parties basically treated the same way that they were before, except for the fact that it has to now go within the confines of the law, that how it is that the seller or the buyer gets paid from the sell side. But then once it's in there, somebody will come over to me and they'll say, look, I'm signing an exclusive. What do you think I should be? What should be here? The listing side put 3% for them and 3% for the buy side. Or maybe they put 3% for the sell side and 1% for the buy side. Again, the idea is that A broker is supposed to bring buyer, ensure that they can get the best buyer for the property. The best buyer may not be the highest price. Maybe the best buyer is going to be the buyer that's going to close all cash and close fastest. I'll tell you what a broker's role is not. A broker's role is not to rush the lawyer and make demands on the lawyer in terms of how things need to get done. I personally always keep my agents involved in the transaction. In other words, I'll have them on BCC. I'll put my broker on the transaction on blind copy so that they can see what's going on as the transaction's proceeding. In other words, I want to make sure I'm on the sales side of a deal and I'm working with you. Then I'm going to blind copy you when I send out the contract of sale to the buy side attorney. This way, I don't have to worry about whether or not you're wondering, has the contract gone out? I also blind copy my clients. Now, from that moment on, you've made an introduction to the attorneys. It's incumbent upon the attorney in the transaction to now properly represent their client. I have had situations that were brought to me, and it turns out that the deal might be a little bit different than the agent may have thought that the deal was when they first came in. And I'll give you an example. I was doing a deal where I was introduced by the buy-side broker, and the listing agent had listed the property as a 2-bedroom and showed a floor plan set up as a 2-bedroom and never disclosed otherwise that it wasn't legally a 2-bedroom. Now, when I came in on the deal, whenever when I talk about the apartment that somebody's buying, I'll ask all different questions. I want to know, is it a 1-bedroom? Is it a 2-bedroom? How many bathrooms are there? So in this particular deal, the brokers had expressed that this is a 2-bedroom. Now, this particular unit, the 2-bedroom wasn't set up like a 2-bedroom. It was actually only set up like a 1-bedroom, but they showed a picture on it as a 2-bedroom, thus not accurately representing what the property looked like now. And they listed it as a 2-bedroom. So the picture showed a 2-bedroom and the listing showed it as a 2-bedroom. When it came to me and they started telling me this, my antennas immediately went up, because that may not be a 2-bedroom. Maybe it's a convertible 2, otherwise known as a junior 4, or maybe maybe it can become an office, or it can become a closet, or a den. There's no assurance from that conversation initially whether or not this could actually be a 2-bedroom. And in my personal experience, if it's a 2-bedroom in this one, I don't recall whether or not, I think there may have only been 1 bathroom. I don't recall though. If there's only 1 bathroom and they're saying it's a 2-bedroom, it's probably not a 2-bedroom. That's one thing. The other area, which is a pretty good indication, is that generally speaking, bedrooms are off of hallways. They're not off of another room. And that's why we know that a wall being put up on an alcove studio does not create a 1-bedroom. A wall being put up on an alcove studio creates a junior 1-bedroom that's not legally a bedroom. Understanding that you're not the lawyer on that transaction is always crucial. And it also gives you the benefit of being able to use that as your crutch. You're talking to a client, and let's just say I speak to the client, you introduce me to them, and now I'm explaining to them that I'm not really sure if it's a 2-bedroom. Well, one of the things that I often hear that agents say is it could be a bedroom because it has a closet or because it has a window. The answer is that there are many different requirements to constituting a bedroom. And until an architect does a full rendering here as to whether or not it could become a bedroom, we really don't know. It's affected by light, air, egress. I'll tell you a couple of things that a bedroom must have, okay? A bedroom cannot be smaller than 8 feet by 8 feet by 8 feet. A bedroom cannot be more than 50% below grade. These are the types of things that, do you have to know it? No, you don't have to know it. You don't have to remember the exact details, but this is where you can say, look, talk to the lawyer. They can better explain to you what would have to happen for it to be a bedroom. Now, I'm going to go through the same things that I'm going through with you, but I'm also going to let them know that we need to hear from an architect. We need to know whether or not there's enough light and air and it would qualify in order to be another bedroom. Now, in situations where, let's just say hypothetically, let's just say, here's another good one. This comes up a lot. Let's just say on a deal, you find out on the property that you're going to be listing that this particular building has turned down sales because of the price that the property went to contract on. Most of you who have been in the business have heard this happen many times. I've heard it happen many times. It's not, and then, some people, they'll call, oh, well, you'll do a renovation credit. A renovation credit's not a real thing. It's something that people do. It's not a real thing. Keep in mind something. If the board and the buyer and the seller all go to contract, and somewhere in the contract, they identify what the parties are going to do. Maybe the seller's agreeing that they're going to scrape, plaster, and paint the entire apartment throughout. It's going to cost $25,000. And if they don't get it done before closing, by the closing date, then they'll just issue a credit. Something like that, it gets attached to the contract. I'm totally comfortable with that. But unfortunately, we get into situations where a co-op doesn't want a price to show below a certain number, yet it's an apartment that won't sell for that number. And so the brokers get into these terrible situations where the only way that they can do a deal is if there's some sort of a compromise or something done at closing. And simply agreeing to $100,000, $200,000 change in price with nothing stated in the contract itself, and just putting it at a higher price and then doing some form of a letter that says that they're going to adjust at closing and they're going to pay less money. That is not something that the lawyer should be involved in. If the brokers are talking amongst themselves and the parties are talking amongst themselves and they want to come to some sort of terms like this, I leave that between them. Unless it's disclosed, it's quite fraudulent, because unless you're going to let the Department of Taxation and Finance know that you really didn't receive that price, you're filling out paperwork. Transfer tax forms list a price. That's supposed to be the amount that got transferred. A 1099 needs to be signed off on by buyers and sellers at closing. That has to identify the amount of money that a seller received. So when we make changes to that, that's not truthful. And so we need to be very careful on how we do what we can do and what we can't do. And so, like I said, look, the broker's role is to show the apartment. It's to bring buyers to a listing. It's to negotiate terms. It's to negotiate terms that both parties are happy with. It's a broker's role to get the board package submitted to the management company. It's the agent's role to provide access on the listing side for a buyer's inspection or for the appraisal to be done through the buyer's lender. The walkthrough right before closing is something that the agents would be doing. Generally speaking, the seller's agent is going to provide access and the buyer's agent will go over there with the client, or sometimes the buyer does, the agents just do the walkthroughs directly, which is completely fine. They can test everything out. Now, it's your role to make sure that you comply with your duties to your clients. And that's where we also get into our acronym. What's the acronym? This is a good question for you guys. What does old car stand for? What does old car stand for? So we're going to talk about this right now. I'm going to go through each of them, and then I'm going to want you to send me an email after the class to let me know an example of how old car comes into you conducting yourself with respect to your transactions. So we'll probably end here at about in another 15 minutes to give you 10 minutes or so to do this, or maybe we'll end in another 10 minutes to do this. So what's required? Well, there's a level of obedience they say is required. What does that mean? Well, you're supposed to follow the rules that your client gives you. Loyalty, loyalty. That means that you have to be loyal to the person that you're representing. It would not be good for you to turn around as a listing agent to say to buyers as they come to your open house, the seller's desperate, just make whatever offers you want. That would not be very loyal. Diligence, being diligent when you're doing a real estate transaction is always, always crucial. It's very important always for you to make sure that your duty to your client, that you observe how you have to behave. I think I said diligence, it's duty. You owe a duty to your client who you're representing. Now, as far as, let me just see if I could pull up here for 1 second. I just want to see something. Just want to see if I can pull this up for you so where you can find that. So what I was saying was you have a duty to your clients, and then confidence. Your clients have to be able to trust that you're not going to violate their confidences, right? They need to be able to, and that goes also to the example that I was giving a few moments ago, whereby you can't say to buyers that your client is desperate and therefore just make any offer. We certainly don't want to be doing that. Now, second, I'm just going to show you. I want to show you while I'm on here before we end, in case you're going to want to look at it while I'm talking about this, is I'm just going to show you on the agency class is where we have the whole acronym spelled out here. Although it's not put into in order, but it's on my agency class on the website for those of you who are unfamiliar with it. But I'll show you as soon as we're done going through it. So we're at obedience, loyalty. I did say disclosure. It's disclosure. You have a duty to disclose relevant information to the parties, confidentiality, accounting for the car, CA. There's an obligation to make sure that everything that your seller gives to you is entrusted with you. So maybe that's going to be the stock certificate and proprietary lease that they give you when they're doing the listing. Maybe it's the offering plan or the financials that they got, or maybe it's the deed to the property, a payoff letter, whatever it might be. You have to account to them and they should be able to rely on you. Last one is reasonable care and diligence. See, I had that wrong. So I had the disclosure on the old car first, and this one is actually, the last one is diligence, reasonable care and diligence. And that basically an example might be that if an agent, let's say, has been working in new development forever, maybe they have a special expertise on new development, or maybe they have a special expertise in estate matters. Maybe they've gotten extra licenses by working with people that are moving into a 55 and older community. Whatever it is, they just want to make sure that they're not handling something that they're not skilled enough in, and that if they do have that extra skill, maybe a broker's also a lawyer, maybe the broker's also an architect, then certainly you're going to be held to a higher standard of care. I'm just going to show you on here, because I'll show you where you can find the paperwork for both classes. I'm just going to share my screen with you now. Okay, so I was actually pulling this up from the agency class. I'm just going to show you. These are, when you go into the website, if you were to go into the courses offered, you can find the list of all of our classes. You could pull anything up that you want. So let's just say today's class, right? Except that I can't find where the handout is for this, but I'm going to show you first. The most important one I want to show you, though, because it is under my agency. It's on the agency handout where it talks about old car right here on Roman numeral 5. So maybe just give me one example of a deal that you did and where loyalty, obedience, disclosure, confidentiality, reasonable care and diligence and accounting would fall into what your role is in a real estate transaction. You'll give us one example, one example of that. And you don't have to you don't have to make it long, just give us one example. Now, one thing that I always say to agents, I think that in the context of your transactions, in addition to everything else that you're taught and the rules that you're given by the Department of State and your rules of ethics, it's all important. I personally find that it's really important to be upfront and transparent. I think that the biggest mistake that agents make in transactions is when they hide information. The sooner that you can be transparent on a deal, no matter how bad it is, the less problems you're going to have. And I'll tell you, if there's a problem with your listing, the sooner that you can get it out there, get it out there. So let's just say hypothetically, you have a listing and now you have the showing. Maybe it's the morning of the showing, you're in the apartment and all of a sudden there's a leak. in the bathroom and it's about to, the showing's right now. You don't want to be canceling. Everybody's downstairs in the lobby already. So what can you do? Well, the minute that they walk in the door, let them know. Look, just this morning, somebody upstairs had overflowed the tub. It will get taken care of. We didn't want to cancel. Or maybe it's that the gas is off in the building and it's going to be off for at least 6 months to a year because they're going to be repiping. Why wait to tell them? Let somebody know up front, right when they get there. Why do you want to get an accepted offer from somebody that's not going to go forward if they're not going to have gas the whole time? So transparency is key. You know, there are certain, and I do believe it's your duty and your role to be transparent, to be honest, to be loyal, to be timely, to be professional. Anything that New York State requires of you, that your company requires of you, that the law requires of you, that's your role. Your role is to find that best department that matches best with your client and just to follow their wishes as long as they're legal and as long as they work within your role as a real estate broker. Now, the biggest thing that I would say isn't your role. It's not your role to tell the lawyers how the deal has to get done. And especially, unless of course it's something that's innocuous. I have no problem with agents saying to me, look, I have a deal. They want to do a post-closing possession, or they want to do a pre-closing occupancy, or I know that they don't want to give a contingency, but my client has to have a funding contingency. Whatever the case may be, you need to bring to the other side in your offer. You need to make the offers, represent your client in a manner that is consistent with their requests and consistent with your obligations as a licensed real estate broker. Now, and of course, your role is also as a broker is to follow the rules of your company, of course, always. Now, I tell agents all the time, I'm grateful for the referrals. That's how I get most of my business. I do have to properly represent my client. I will always do my best to make sure that the closing is not going to happen unless everybody's getting paid. And what we don't want to do is we don't want to be rushed. If there are pieces of the puzzle, whether it's on a broker side or on the legal side, that need to be authenticated or determined prior to the client signing, and that's how the attorneys feel, then let them do their job. We want to make sure that everybody is comfortable and that everybody's properly represented. The last thing that you want to do is force a deal that's not a good deal for your client or can be problematic later on. You certainly want to be the broker that has repeat clients. Just like I want to be the lawyer that has repeat clients. It's not just about that one deal, because that one rental client becomes a sales client. The studio apartment client becomes the house client. So you just want to make sure that you follow the rules. All right, we're going to end here so that you guys could all send me an email. If you don't do it right now, that's okay. Just get it done before the end of the day today. Make sure so that Vanessa could send you out your certificates afterwards. And we will be sending out the September class schedule this week. So with that, I hope everyone has a great day. Enjoy the last week of summer. Happy Labor Day, and I'll see you next month. Take care.